Hello and welcome to Fired Up. My name is Morgan McLintic, and today we're going to be talking about how to recruit your marketing team. With the upswing coming, and we're seeing more deals going through, interest rates have come down, marketing teams are starting to prepare to open new positions. So we thought it would be a good chance to talk to a recruitment expert all about hiring your team. What should we expect? What's the condition of the market? What's going on with compensation and benefits? What should the process be? How can you set up your startup to grab the best talent? And there's great talent out there right now. You need to make sure that you can bring in people as you open up those positions. What roles are in most demand? What's going on with Gen Z? We have so many questions. And so today we're bringing in Chris Jensen, and he's the Director of Business Development for JBC Work Genius. And now they're a recruitment agency that focuses on marketing roles. And so we thought it would be a good chance to talk to him all about what he's seeing in the market, because it's different from the peak at ZERP. We're not back to that. Where are we? So please join me in welcoming Chris Jensen to Fired Up. Chris, hi. It's great to see you again. How are you?
I'm doing well, Morgan. Thank you. It's good to see you too. How are you?
I'm great. And thanks for joining us, because today we're going to be talking a bit about how to recruit a marketing team. I think the market is going to lift a little bit as fundraising comes in here, but you're the expert. So just at the top of the show here, just give us a quick rundown of what you're seeing in the market.
Some of the conditions that I've been tracking and keeping an eye on over the last couple of years really are influenced by a few factors, to include technical advancements and the broader economic trends as well. So a few of those that I've been keeping an eye on are data-driven marketing, automation marketing, and then the shift towards hiring freelance and contract personnel just to adopt more of a flexible workforce and hiring practice to complete certain projects and or campaigns. Now, I say that with the market is still very favorable for candidates that have skill sets within the data, digital, and AI-driven space. As we know, AI is becoming a big thing, and that's not going to go away. And so the more that candidates can really develop their skills in those specific areas, the more competitive they'll be in the market.
So it's still a candidates market. There are more positions compared to the number of candidates. They can take their choice, but it sounds like leaning towards candidates with more technical skills, but also, hey, people who are willing to be flexible. Do I have that right? What other roles are in hot demand at the moment?
You do have that right. Some of the roles that are high demand that really fall under a few of those umbrellas that we just talked about would be like digital marketers, email marketers, performance marketing, SEO, SEM specialists, growth marketing, marketing data analysts, just to name a few. Obviously, there's demand gen that falls in there as well. And a lot of those roles that kind of fall within that digital and data. And then AI now is starting to bubble up to the surface as well.
Interesting. So all of those roles are pretty tied to revenue, demand gen, growth marketing. Digital marketing has been around for, all marketing is digital at this point, but I think people use that expression. But you mentioned there sort of AI, and is that sort of a component of most of these roles? Or have you even seen AI marketer dedicated roles?
I haven't yet. I think this is still a work in progress. I do know that in my conversations that I'm having with folks, kind of the surface level engagement from an AI perspective in marketing would be along the lines of like Chat GPT and some of those tools that are out there to help with like writing and grammar and things like that. As AI continues to become more and more of a focal point in technology marketing in general, I think we'll see that evolve a lot more, and there will be some skill sets that will be favorable towards those types of roles.
back in the ZERP period, you just couldn't hire anyone. We couldn't find candidates. Now it feels like it's flipped a little bit. So as a brand, I'm a startup marketer. I'm trying to attract candidates, good candidates. What are some of the things that I can do to start putting myself at the front of the selection pack there?
I think to start, if you're looking to hire folks within what we've just been talking about that have those kind of those niche technical skill sets, if you will, those folks they're all still very much working and they're not on the market long because they are favorable. But in general, some things that you can do as a hiring manager when you have a high demand role come up is first and foremost, make sure that the recruiter that you're working with understands what it is that you are looking for. That only helps them get out of the gate strong when they take this into the market. I would say, secondly, post the job opening, try to get it out into the market using as many resources as you can. Provide feedback to your recruiter on submittals, interviews, basically as candidates are moving through the process in a timely manner. Because again, these high demand candidates aren't in the market long. And then you want to make sure to align your compensation with the market that you're hiring in. And then I would say finally, when I touched on this a little bit earlier as well, engage a recruiting agency. They are in the market. They've been in the market. A lot of times they're specialized in some of these high demand areas and have a pool of candidates ready to go. So those are just a few things that you can do to really stay ahead of the game there.
Yeah, I think that's important because I could look at the market and I know that there are some people like at the moment, we're in that sort of inflection point between some positions are quite hard to fill and others people are looking and it's taking them a long time to find something. We're sort of toggling over now. So depending on where you're at, you might see something different. But if you bring in a recruitment agency, they can give you more data points on more reference there. And if I'm thinking about from a recruitment agency perspective, when we think about interview process, I think the top tier candidates always have a choice, right? And so therefore your recruitment process needs to be good. Obviously you want to find the right person, but it also needs to be fast. I mean, when you think about a recruitment process, what can companies do to make sure that that is efficient?
So a few things that come to mind on that is ensuring that your interview process is streamlined and fast. And I think you really got to kind of take into consideration the level of role that you're hiring for. So for example, like a mid-level type of marketer, I would probably look at like anywhere between a 3 to 4 day process. And that could include an assessment. But then when you get into the higher level, like director and above, it's a little bit longer of a process, right? This is typically folks that are managing people and more of a behavioral, in addition to a skill set type of interview. I would say if you're able to keep it at a 5-day type of a process, then the likelihood of keeping them engaged and interested is much higher. Because again, these people, like you said, Morgan, they have options, and the more you can keep them engaged and move them through the process as quickly as possible, the more likelihood the result will be what you want, and that is to get the hire.
That sort of strikes me, perhaps many listening, as a little bit shorter than most would assume, right? Because what you're talking about is you have the first interview on the Monday, and for more junior roles, come Wednesday, Thursday, the offer's on the table. And even for more senior roles, in an ideal world, Friday, I spoke to them on Monday, we've got through, even if it includes an assessment, a meeting with the senior person, the senior decision maker on this, maybe the team lead or what have you, then the offer's out by the end of the week. That's the standard that you need to get towards.
Yeah. And I think to add to that, it's always good to know, like, where are these candidates in their job search currently, right? And if they're like interviewing first, second rounds, or even above that, those are the ones you really want to try to move through as quickly as possible so that in the end, they can make the right decision, right? I would say there's some flexibility for those that are just kind of getting into their job search. They probably have a little more time to work with, but I would say in general, that timeline within the process is good.
So number one, move faster. You've got less time than you thought. What are some of the other sort of mistakes that you see with hiring managers? Being too slow is definitely one. Where else do companies go wrong?
What I've seen just over the years is, and more so in this digital age, right, that we're in, and as assessments have become more and more prominent in interviewing processes, especially around the technical aspects of things. Giving an assessment right out of the gate before talking to a candidate will turn a candidate off more times than not. I feel and have been involved in processes and getting candidates set up for interviews with customers who want to do that assessment first so that it's not wasting anyone's time afterwards. And we've seen a lot of candidates get turned off by that and not want to move forward in the process. So that would be one thing. Another thing is no eye-to-eye contact in the Zoom interview. We've had instances where managers will be looking at another monitor or just not engaged with the candidate from an eye-to-eye contact perspective. That turns candidates off. And then showing up late to the interview is also
it's on both sides, right? You know, if the candidate shows up late, it's a lack of respect, but that cuts both ways.
Yes. And then I would say the last point on that would be giving candidates time to ask questions in the end of the interview.
So let's talk about assessments, right? In the peak time when there were fewer roles and there were more candidates, you could put an assessment at the front of your process as a hurdle to sort of weed out the people who are interested or qualified because there were so many candidates applying. This was a good filter. Now we've sort of flipped a little bit where the market's slightly different. It's a bit, perhaps a bit more imbalanced. So what you're saying is, yeah, have an assessment, but maybe it's not the front, unless you've got a very strong brand. I don't know what Google's process is, but like lots of people want to work for Google. They've got to have a filter. Maybe they can. But if you're a smaller brand and you've got to work a bit harder to compete against, you're not going to necessarily win on compensation. You've got to win on some other criteria. Don't put your assessment up front. It's going to put people off, even the best people, because they've got options.
Yeah. And I would say on that, you can still have it happen very early in the process, right? I usually like to consult with managers and folks that I'm working with that have an assessment to do it after the first conversation. And this could even be like conversation with HR, recruiting, first level hiring manager. And if that all goes well, then put the assessment in place before getting them engaged in other conversations.
I'm a big fan of an assessment because people are pretty good at interviewing, and this is a chance to really sort of test, do they have the skills to actually do the job that you are doing? And as long as they get some value out of it too, and then maybe it can be a learning thing too. So that's best practice. Then it sounds like some managers are just, this is just basic, I don't know, meeting etiquette. Turn up on time and look at the person.
Yeah.
And dress accordingly. You've got to show some respect for the person's time, and that means looking them in the face.
Yes. Agree.
That feels like an easy thing to get, right? And you also talked about sort of allowing time for candidates to ask questions. I think that's important. This is a two-way street. They're going to spend a lot of time, their waking hours thinking about, or if not actually working on this task, it's got to be a good fit for them. So you've got to allow them time for questions, and many do prepare. I've had some just ask very basic, like, so what's your role? And I think you can kind of work that out in advance. But how much of a 30-minute interview should I allocate to them asking questions about the role?
So in a 30-minute interview, I think 10 minutes at the end of the interview is always a good amount of time. 30-minute interviews are usually more of a surface level kind of interview. So the questions will probably be in that area as well, more surface level from the candidate. So I usually say like 10 minutes is usually good in the end.
That makes sense. But it's a decent, in that initial pass, which is going to be the majority of interviews, you're going to spend 10 minutes or whatever talking about the company and the role and just sort of getting people situated, little bits and basic stuff, 10 minutes of your actual questions that are a bit sort of deeper, and then giving the candidate 10 minutes feels like a sort of good format. You mentioned compensation a little while ago. What are the trends that you're seeing in compensation, both in terms of salary and then talk to me a bit about benefits or any interesting benefits? We had a heyday, we had lots of exotic benefits. I feel like some of that maybe has pared back a bit during the downturn when it comes to tech. But what are you seeing?
From what I've seen just over the last few years, and even more so this year, as we get into the inflation and cost of living and some of these things that have been happening over the last few years, they're still very competitive in like the San Francisco Bay Area where we're at, Morgan, but also in some of the key tech hubs across the country, right? Still very competitive. Haven't seen much of an impact to salaries in the market because of some of those more economic factors. That's kind of where salaries are right now. If you get outside of some of those key tech hubs, you'll see salaries aren't as inflated as they were back in the heyday in 2022. So that's what I'm seeing with regard to salaries. Now, as far as benefits, every company kind of has their way of how they put their package together to sweeten the deal, if you will, for candidates. So I haven't really seen any trends, although to your point, I have seen like some of these outlandish benefits that were being offered back a couple years ago when there were more jobs than candidates in the market. They have trended downward a little bit and normalized, if you will. But bottom line there is that every company kind of has the package that they do that really aligns with their culture and who they are as a company to kind of sweeten that deal a little bit for candidates. Okay.
So if I have this right, during the boom, salaries were escalating quite rapidly and were getting quite high, were competitive. We've had a couple of years where things have leveled off. Inflation has still been there. So I guess against that, your buying potential has gone down a bit, but they maybe held steady. They haven't actually gone down. I mean, I've heard of some companies laying off and then recruiting similar positions, but just sort of more junior people for a lot lower salaries to try and get some cost out of their business. But it sounds like when it comes to marketing roles, what you're seeing, that's not really the case. Maybe they went up, but they sort of capped and they're still remaining at that high point. They just haven't really been growing over the last couple of years.
Yes, I would say for these high demand roles, yes. Now, other not so high demand roles, salaries have definitely normalized for those, but these high demand, more data driven and AI and automation, digital, those have not been impacted a whole lot.
Okay. And by normalized, do you mean reduced or do you just mean not as competitive?
Yeah, they've kind of come down a little bit.
Okay. So they've eased off a little bit. So if you were recruiting for the same role 2 years ago, you'd have expected to pay a little bit more for a particular candidate than you would do today. But for the more technical AI, data-driven ones, just as competitive as it was back at the peak. Okay. Yeah. Now, I want to talk a bit about remote positions and in-office ones and the difference in demand, particularly topical now. You just saw Amazon get everyone back into the office and a lot of debate about whether that was a good move. Is that going to they're going to lose a lot of talent? Is that going to make them less competitive in the market? But that's Amazon, right? They're going to be competitive for everyone. There's lots of people who want to work for Amazon. But when it comes to most sort of startups and tech companies recruiting in their marketing roles, does it make a difference whether this is remote or whether it's in office? What are you seeing?
Yes, interesting article from Amazon. I think I saw Google tried to do this a while back as well. And I think Meta did too, if I remember correctly. And it's just interesting the amount of pushback that they got from candidates, and Amazon's getting a lot of pushback right now as well. What I've seen in the market post-pandemic is yes, remote was still very fluent as we were coming out of that pandemic. And then as we come into this year, more and more companies are developing these hybrid schedules, which seems to be working. And yes, to your point, a lot of the companies that are in this small to medium sized business sector are still very much moving with hybrid and fully remote environments. And from the recruiting side of things, what we're seeing is candidates are a lot more open than they were even a year ago to hybrid schedules. But when you start talking about 5 days on site, they get a little reluctant. Candidates like the flexibility that remote work brings and is always a favorable option for them. And for us, when we're recruiting candidates, that's what we're seeing is either hybrid or fully remote seems to be kind of where the market is leaning right now.
So if you're all in the office and you want to recruit marketing for a marketing position, that's going to limit the pool of candidates you can go after because a lot of people, that's just not what they're looking for. And also just from a catchment area perspective, I guess it's limiting because you're going after people who can drive to whatever that location is, one of your locations. So if you have a competitive role, going fully remote probably feels like you're going to increase the number of potential candidates you could get.
Yeah, that's correct. And it gives a recruiter more bandwidth on their end to not be pigeonholed to a certain market where there may not be many of these candidates available for work in that particular market. So that's also a huge factor in candidate flow is the more flexibility we have on the recruiting side to expand our reach into different markets for fully remote roles, then typically that results in a higher flow of candidates to present.
Again, for startups, they may be fully remote. They may not have a lot of actually sort of property. I mean, if you're Amazon, you've got long-term leases on large amounts of space. So you're sort of going to lean towards trying to use that space as much as possible. If you're a younger company and you don't have offices or you have limited space positions for people to come into the office, you can be more flexible. And actually, that's going to increase the number of candidates that you can get. So that's probably an ace card that you can play as long as that works for your company. And then talk to me a bit about hiring Gen Z candidates, increasing proportion of the working population now. Millennials are not the new kids on the block here. Is there anything that we should know about hiring Gen Z employees, what they're looking for, how to interview them? What can you tell us about that?
I actually posted something on my LinkedIn about a month ago or so. I'll be sure to send you the links to everything that you can share with the audience. But Gen Z is definitely coming into the market. This is going to be the next generation to drive our market forward. And so this article from Hi Bob is the name of the resource that I found. It had some really good insight on how you can prepare for this generation to come into the workforce. And a few things that I took away from it are they lack experience with critical technologies. So this is a generation that they like the face-to-face meetings, but through FaceTime or video, right? This is a generation that probably started to kind of come into the workforce during the pandemic when everything was done via Zoom, and devices are a big part of this as well. So they like that face-to-face communication, whether it's in person or via Zoom call, but they will lack some experience with some of the critical technologies out there. Social skills, there'll be a gap there, right? Because of that pandemic device, no person to person interaction for a while there. So social skills will definitely be something that they'll need to be mentored on, is what we're seeing. And then finally, they want a great work-life balance. I think we all want that as well. And that's a huge benefit that a lot of candidates look at. But more specifically for Gen Z, that's a generational thing. And that's something that they're going to be looking at. But the article has some really good other points too. And look forward to sharing that with the audience.
When it comes to hiring these guys, look, some of the social graces that we might expect because they've been drilled into you in person historically, this generation maybe has not had an opportunity to learn. And so when it comes to recruitment, what does that mean? Like they don't send a thank you email afterwards. I've seen them not actually, contrary to what you've said, not turn on the video in an interview because they prefer not to. And I mean, I want to see the person. Absolutely. It's that kind of thing it's got nothing to do with whether they're capable of doing the job. It's just their expectations and what they've been taught. It's definitely a factor, but maybe as a hiring manager, we got to kind of look past that at their skills.
Yeah, exactly. As hiring managers for this generation, we have to be patient with them because they will require some mentoring and polishing, if you will, on the professional side of things to a certain extent. I mean, it's a pretty big range of when they were born and what that generational range is. I think people on the higher end of the range that are the older Gen Z still understand that element, but the younger ones are definitely going to require a little bit more patience and mentoring and that kind of thing.
One question I have is I interviewed someone recently in this cohort. Yeah, they didn't have the video on. They turned up a bit late. They didn't know who I was. They certainly didn't follow up. The only follow up when I turned them down was, can you give me any feedback? So I took the time to say, okay, prepare for the interview. You got to turn up on time, turn the video on, try and find out who's interviewing you, have some questions lined up, which they didn't have. I took the time to do that because I think that's important. But I was almost in two minds of whether to do it. A, because it takes some time, but B, I don't want to be sort of bagging on candidates, or I don't want them to misinterpret my feedback as criticism. I mean, what's your general advice about feedback from a hiring manager? I don't want any legal exposure, but equally people need to learn and they're bored of the bland, sorry, you weren't a cultural fit.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
That's a good question. And you have to be careful with feedback that you put out there concerning candidates, right? From a legal perspective. And I think the more surface level you can keep it, like for instance, to use your example of not turning the camera on, I would definitely let them know, for starters, you didn't turn your camera on. I couldn't see you. That kind of feedback is good, but you definitely got to be careful about getting too into the weeds of certain elements of that and just keep it very surface level and growth oriented, if you will. I think a lot of candidates look for that feedback so they can grow in their next conversation that they have. So yeah, that's how I would handle that.
Yeah, and obviously this was a junior position, so I think it's important to give people as much feedback as you can and you have the time to do because it's just good practice. Okay, so what other advice do you have for startups when it comes to sort of hiring for marketing roles? We're coming into an upswing. There's going to be new positions. Those positions are going to be competitive for the best quality talent like there always is. Mm-hmm. What should I, as a hiring manager, do?
Everything we talked today covers it. I will say that in some recent kind of trend monitoring that I've been doing, I do see that startups are going to be on the front end of this rebound, just from what I'm reading, different articles that I'm reading. So from that perspective, and I know that applies really a lot to this audience here, I would just take some of the points we talked about today, incorporate that into your process, and you should be good. And if there's ever any questions, you can always reach out to me through Morgan. I'd be more than happy to connect and answer any questions you might have or provide any type of guidance that I'm able to do.
That's great, Chris. And so, what I was hearing here is be prepared to be competitive still on salary and compensation and benefits. Move fast, as in 3 to 4, 5 days. Give people a good experience in the interview, face to face. It can be virtual, but looking them in the eye, giving them time to ask their own questions there too. And if you do those kind of things, you're going to set yourself up pretty well to be sort of competitive That's wonderful. Thanks for that, Chris. So Chris Jensen is the Director of Business Development at JBC Work Genius, which is a recruitment agency. They specialize in marketing positions, and that's how we have got to know each other. Chris, thanks for joining me today. Really enjoyed that. I think there's some great advice as people build out their marketing teams. If people want to reach out to you, where should they go?
So they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Morgan, I will send you my email. They can email me, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty open to different ways of communication.
Wonderful. So we'll provide all that in the show notes. Chris, great to catch up with you again. Thanks for the rundown on all things when it comes to recruitment for marketing teams. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me, Morgan. I really appreciate this and glad I could help and put some advice and pointers out there.
Wonderful. We'll talk to you again soon. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, thank you.